There's not many an Irishman who's messed with a fairy fort and lived to tell the tale, but I'll tell you the story of one man who did. A long time ago, in the village of Lahinch in County Clare, lived a man by the name of Johnny. Now Johnny, he loved to hunt, he was fond of a gun, and Johnny had a friend by the name of Pat, and the two lads went everywhere together. Pat used to accompany Johnny on his hunting trips all the time. Now this one day, Pat and Johnny had their sandwiches packed and off they set off into the countryside for the hunting session. Now, by the time evening fell, they had covered half the countryside and they'd had a rather productive day. Both men had caught themselves a rabbit for dinner that night. When they were on the final leg of their journey home, they were passing by Corbelly's ring fort. Now Corbelly's ring fort was a huge big double ring fort surrounded by white thorn bushes. And as they passed, they could see the moon rising up over the bushes. It was a early November evening, and as you know, at that stage of the year, it gets dark early in the evening. Now, as they were passing, Pat turns to Johnny and he said, "Here, Johnny, do you see that big bird up in the bush up there? Sure, Jesus, it's as big as a goose. Give us that old gun there." "What are you talking about?" says Johnny. "There's no bird up in that bush at all." But before he knew it, Pat had the gun out of his hand, he had the gun cocked, and he shot the bird. Pow! Pat seen the bird flapping and fluttering and falling through the bush. He said to Johnny, "Hold that old gun there, I'm going to go up and get that bird." And he did. He walked up, and when he got to the bush, he looked in and he seed the bird at the bottom of the bush. He stuck his hand in, and when he went to grab it, he grabbed it and pulled it back out. But when he pulled it out, there was no bird in his hand, but his hand was full of suds, like suds from a bubble bath. He turned to Johnny and he said, I'm sure there was a bird here 2 seconds ago." "Oh, let's go," said Johnny. "I don't know what you've done, but let's get out of here while we still can." So the two lads made off as fast as they could. Now, the next morning, Johnny was a little bit worried about Pat because he didn't come around to call for him. So Johnny called around to Pat's house and he knocked on the door. But there was no answer. So he walked around the side of the house and he peered in through the kitchen window, but still no sign of Pat. And he walked around to the back, around where the bedroom was, and he looked in the window and he seen Pat laid out, stretched out in the bed for all the world to see. He gave a tap on the window, and as he did, Pat stirred in the bed and looked over towards Johnny and motioned for him to lift up the window, and Johnny did. And he said, "Well, what's up with you there, Pat?" "Oh," said Pat, I tried to get up out of the bed this morning and I couldn't move my legs or body. I can't move at all. I'm wrecked. Would you come in there and make us an old cup of tea to get us up?" "Oh, sure," said Johnny. "I've no key to get in the door. How am I to get in?" Pat says, "The key is under the basket outside the door. Come around and let yourself in and make us a cup of tea." So that's what Johnny did. He walked around to the front of the house. He picked up the key underneath the basket beside the door, let himself in, and went in and made his friend a cup of tea and a bit of toast. And when he brought it up to Johnny, he watched him eat the toast and drink the tea, and when he was done, he said, "Pat, I don't like the look of you. You're looking fierce queer. Sure, look at you. You're shivering away in that bed after you're only drinking that hot tea. It's like you're after coming in from the Antarctic. I think I'll go down and get the doctor for you," he says. "Oh, would you do that?" said Pat. "I'd really appreciate it. I'm not feeling the best at all." So off Johnny went. He went down to town and he got the doctor. But sure, once the doctor got there and he took one look at Pat, he said to him, "Oh boy, there's nothing I can do for you. We'll have to send you off to Lisdoonvarna Workhouse Hospital." Now, Lisdoonvarna Workhouse Hospital was where they sent all the hopeless cases, those who they were not expecting to return. So they loaded Pat up onto the car, brought him to the hospital, checked him into the ward, and sure, what more could they do, only leave him there for the night. Now, in the middle of the night, Pat was stirred by a noise over by the wall of the workhouse hospital on the ward. When he looked over, he seen a leg coming in through the wall, and another leg, and another one, and another one. And before he knew it, he could see 2 men standing there with a coffin up on their back. And as they walked in further through the wall, another man came into his vision with the coffin up on his back. The men looked around the room and they spotted Pat's bed and made a byline for it. Oh, Pat thought his number was up. He thought they were bringing the coffin to bury him. But when they got down beside the bed, they laid the coffin down and started to unscrew the top. And when they lifted off the top, who was in the coffin? Only a man riddled with bullet holes and pellet holes. The big burly man who had been standing at the back of the coffin turned to Pat and said, "Here you, take a look inside that coffin and see what you did to my brother when you shot him at that ring fort yesterday. Now get down here and get up out of that bed and pick every one of them pellets out of my brother, or you'll never get up out of that bed again," he said. Oh, Pat didn't need to be told twice. He was up out of the bed and he was picking out the pellets out of the man. When he got the last pellet out of the man turned to him and gave him a deathly stare. Pat was startled and he jumped under the bed. He thought now they were going to stick him in the coffin, but they didn't. The man got up out of the bed. They screwed the top of the coffin back on, hooshed it back up onto their shoulders, and walked out back through the wall again. Jesus. Pat jumped into the bed. He pulled the covers up over his head, sweating and shivering, and he stayed there till the middle of the morning. When the doctor came around, he put his hand on Pat's shoulder, and Pat was stirred because he thought the men had come back to get him again. The doctor examined Pat. He said to him, "Oh, sure boy, there's nothing wrong with you at all. You're brand new. Get up out of that bed there." Later that morning, they checked Pat out of the hospital. And I don't need to tell you that Pat never messed with a fairly fort again. In fact, he never gave himself the opportunity to, because at the first chance, he was off to America, and that's where he stayed for the rest of his life.